So guys, good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Leanna Divine and I'm the host of TAP, otherwise known as the Alphabet Podcast. So today we're going to stay on A and we're going to stick with the authentic self. So I'm going to entitle this episode of the podcast, The Authentic Self, What Lies Behind the Mask. So before we start anything today, I just want to say hi guys. I wonder what you're doing, how you're listening. People have got back to me and said they listen in the gym. Some people listening while they're washing up. Kelly, I know you like to listen to the odd podcast while you're doing your washing up. But I think it's important because the reason for this podcast is that life is very stressful. Mental health is very important. So it's important sometimes that we just take some time out. So if you guys have listened to anxiety and attachment, you may be quite aware that I speak quite briefly, but very importantly about breathing exercises and how important they are in terms of managing anxiety, but also in the management of panic attacks. But I think using breathing exercises every day can just be sometimes a quick reset. So, sometimes if you're at work and people piss you off or your children, it's 6 weeks holidays now. I can actually hear children playing outside as I'm recording this. We can get very stressed out. So it's important that sometimes we just remember to breathe. So I'm just going to start this session, make use of the visual. And now that you guys can see me, just take you through a very simple breathing exercise that I do with my clients. So I think some people call it box breathing, but you've got loads of different breathing exercises online. So if this particular one doesn't, float your boat, you can try some others. But just for me as well, because I'm about to start speaking, about to go into something quite, serious. So I'll just do it along with you. So we just want to inhale and hold to the count of 4. And then we want to breathe out to the count of 4. So we want to breathe in to the count of 4, hold, and breathe out to the count of 4. I like to close my eyes while I'm breathing and just kind of take myself away. So as we kind of go through the series of podcasts where there is visual, we can go through some different techniques. So for those of you that are quite used to breathing exercises, some mindful breathing exercises where you just concentrate on keeping your mind in the present. So for you guys, continue to do those breathing exercises for a couple of minutes while I just have a little word with you. So also something that I think is very important to kind of introduce on a daily basis, especially as you guys are trying to be your own therapist here, is to think of some things that you're grateful for, because I think gratitude is really important with a lot of mental health and just how we look at things and just our perspective. I find that just by thinking about a couple of things that we're grateful for, sometimes it can kind of change the process of the day. So now you finished your breathing exercises, what 2 things are you grateful for? I think today I'm grateful for good friends and good family, because I think this whole process, starting a podcast alongside my work and my caring responsibilities, it's a lot to juggle. And I appreciate the unconditional support that comes my way, because sometimes it's just a small word that can change my whole day. So today I'm grateful for my friends and family. But what are you grateful for? And it's important that you do this on a regular basis. So, what are you grateful for? What 2 things did you enjoy today? What 2 things from today would you like to do again tomorrow? So it's just important that we're looking at the little things that can just kind of change those perceptions. So before we start with the authentic self and what lies behind the mask, I think that's what I'm going to call this episode, I'm going to introduce you to Bubbles. Now, Bubbles is the Rasta monkey. And if you stick around to the end, you can find out how, Bubbles, the Rasta monkey, can help during a crisis. So we'll just put Bubbles back there. You stay there, Bubbles. So guys, the authentic self. What is the authentic self? It's a word that is thrown around quite a lot. You hear influencers, be your authentic self. You must be your authentic self. But do the lay person, the average person, even know what being the authentic self is? Because when I speak to my friends, they often feel like it's a lot more about being real. But I'll put this to you. Can you Can you, let me think about this. Let me think about the way that I can put this. So if you're not aware that you're being not real, does that still make you not real? Now, because there are a lot of people walking around wearing a mask, and it's a mask they may not be aware that they're wearing. So if they're being real while wearing this mask, I ask you again, is that being authentic? So the first thing that we can kind of say is that authentic is a lot more than being real. So you hear that a lot. Authentic is about being real. I can be real while not knowing that I'm wearing a mask. Think about actors. They're real all the time whilst wearing a mask for their role. And I think a lot of the time people just don't understand what the authentic self means. So the first thing I will say to you guys is a lot more than being real. If I had to explain the authentic self to an alien, this is how I often think about how I explain things. I simply would just show them a small child. So the authentic self is a lot about the core of you, you know, it's about your behavior, your words, your actions, you know, what you value, all aligning. So there's no discrepancies or incongruence between those aspects of yourself. You know, how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you, everything kind of matches up. So if I was going to describe, like I say, being the authentic self, I'd show them a small child. The smaller, the better. You know, that small child that's screaming and saying, no, mummy, I don't want to do that. More than capable of making their own decisions, very much in touch with how they feel and what they want. You know, and I think we all start off authentic. You know, so we've done the attachment stuff now. So you know how it starts and how we all have different attachment styles. But the authentic self continues from the attachment. So for those kids, you know, the Orville who has the secure attachment, being the authentic self will be less of a challenge, shall we say. But for the other kids who have an insecure attachment and have all other difficulties to go with it, being the authentic self may well be a bit more difficult, if that makes sense. So if I was to describe what the authentic self looks like, because a lot of you will probably be sitting here thinking, I think I'm quite authentic. You know, my friends tell me I'm authentic and all of the rest of it, but it's a lot more, like I say, than being real. So the first thing I'll say, an authentic person, when I think about an authentic person, so I know I was joking around the other day and I was kind of, you know, taking off clothes and saying, I feel more comfortable like this. So it's a lot more than what you wear. An authentic person will listen to other people's opinions, shall we say. So they will listen to other people's opinions, which is important. But with an authentic person, they value their opinions more, which you can see is quite a healthy process. You can see how the reverse is not so healthy. So valuing other people's opinions more than your own is problematic. So for, you know, for the authentic self, these people will value their own opinions. What else will they do? They'll be, you know, capable of making their own decisions. So you find a lot of people, they're not really comfortable or capable of making their own decisions. You know, they'll be asking their friends and trying to get opinions and, you know, they don't really hold much value in what they think. You know, the authentic self, though, that person will have good self-esteem because obviously how you view yourself is very important in terms of being authentic. If you have very low self-esteem, it's going to be very hard for you then to be authentic in any way. So, you know, you've got this, you know, these authentic people that can make their own decisions, value their own opinions, you know, and that is what it means to be authentic. But, you know, if we all start off that way, how is it that we are not living authentic lives? And this is a bit, you know, more difficult to digest. So, you know, as children, we interact with the world, you know, we start going to school and nursery, and then we may become more aware that, you know, some of the behaviors that we do, we get in trouble for, and some of the behaviors that we do are praised. Now, it is very dependent on the child because I'll give you an example. I'm one of 5 children, and my mum has given us consistent parenting. We've had the same parenting, but obviously we're all individuals. Now, like I say, we start off as our authentic self, and then we start having these interactions with the world. Now, not everything is about parents. So it's not just parents that we interact with. So it's not a parent bashing podcast. So if things are going wrong for you in your life, it's not always to do with your parents. So let's get that out there. So what can happen is, and I think, parents, aunties, all of the people that do it, teachers, they mean well when they do it. So, excessive praise. So, if you're maybe a child that's good at school, you're very academic, and you get a lot of praise when you do things well, and maybe not much praise for anything else. And that's not because your parents or your teachers are not proud of any other aspects of your life, but maybe they highlight particularly that you're very good at school. So depending on the personality of the child and depending on their attachments and all of the stuff that's gone before, a child can absorb that and take that to mean that now I'm only worthy if I'm doing well academically. And on a basic level, that's what we can call a condition of worth. So that's when we're shown positive regard on the condition of us doing something. So, you might have them children that are really helpful, and their parents praise them for being really helpful. And they do that throughout their lives. And I'll make mum happy. I'll be really helpful. Now, for most children, they'll grow out of that. But for some children that grow into adults, they will keep that need to be helpful and to be, they're only worthy if they're helpful. And you can see how that can then lead on to being maybe a people pleaser in adulthood. So, a good example is, like I say, I'm the oldest of 5, and my mum raised us exactly the same way. And my mum has a strong emphasis on education. Yeah, there's no two ways about it. She won't change, and I don't blame her. You should encourage your children. But my personality and my role in the family being the oldest, I have absorbed or introjected that as being, my mum's, only happy with me when I do well at school. So as a child, I was always a high achiever. As a teenager, I was high achiever, always got, good grades. But as an adult, I realized how problematic it had become, because I was always seeking to achieve, to get this validation. I want my mum to be proud of me. I really want to achieve. And, that can be quite lonely. And I realized that I was very self-critical. So if I didn't do as well as maybe I could have, I was very self-critical, and I was putting a lot of pressure and expectation on myself, and I realized that maybe I'd become a bit of a perfectionist, and it was worse when I just didn't achieve what I wanted to. And I noticed that sometimes, even when I did achieve something, it wasn't like I stopped to acknowledge it, and just trace that through. So if you have a child that, is feels like they're only worthy if they're being quiet. So going back to Jeremiah, who's not allowed to show these big emotions, and that's in attachment, guys, that's not allowed to show these big emotions, maybe following on from being praised for being quiet. So how could that possibly impact on you as an adult if that particular child absorbs that and takes that into adulthood and believes that they should be quiet and not show emotions? Are they then going to be being authentic? Even though they may not be able to trace that back, and they may think that they're just quiet, or they may think that they're just a people pleaser or a high achiever. Actually, it's come from somewhere else. And if you're not aware of that, and you're not aware of these conditions of worth and how they play out, then actually it's going to be problematic in your life and for your mental health. So we've had a little bit of look at what stops us being inauthentic, but just, I kind of briefly touched on it because it comes up a lot in therapy. So you will find that a lot of people pleasers as children were very compliant, and they were praised for being good children, and they've taken that forward, and then they've become people pleasers. And as you know about people pleasing, I've mentioned it before, even though people pleasers are on the whole kind and helpful people, they are kind and helpful people because that's how they gain their worth. So a lot of the time they may well be doing things to please other people, and definitely not being authentic in the sense of agreeing with people that they don't agree with, valuing other people's opinions more than their own. So that's the first sign that they're not being authentic, not able to make decisions for themselves, going out of their way to do things for people when they don't really want to do it. You can see how being a people pleaser has that kind of effect, and you can kind of see how these conditions of worth play out. So that feeling that you're only worthy if you do something can cause a problem for some people, not for everybody, but for some people. So I'll ask again, if you're not aware that you're wearing a mask because it's gone so far back, does that make you not real? Does that make you inauthentic? It's a difficult one. So how do we know if we're not being authentic? Now, if you've got good friends, they can probably tell you. But in a therapy sense, the first sign that I have that a client is got issues with their authentic self and being their authentic self, and that could be causing them a problem, is incongruence. And the easiest way I can describe incongruence is, not being genuine. So maybe your actions, behavior, and so forth not adding up. And for me as a therapist, it's very easy to spot that in a session. So I'll kind of give you an example. So it's just like a client that maybe possibly would be telling me something extremely sad while laughing. Does that seem to match up? Telling me a sad story while laughing? Or maybe the other way around. It's about noticing incongruence. And the best way that you can deal with someone whose behaviors and actions don't match up is just to model good behavior. So if they're being incongruent, so they're not being genuine, you just be genuine. And as therapists, that's what we do. A bit later on, I'll explain to you a little bit about the first tools in a therapist's toolbox, and that's the core conditions, which are empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence. Now, for the authentic self, this is the only tools a therapist will probably use. Okay, so we got the incongruence. Low self-esteem would indicate that we're not being authentic, because if we don't value ourselves or see ourselves in a positive light, how can we be being authentic then? Caring more about what others think. So I've said that already. Not being comfortable making your own decisions. The people pleasing, which is a really, 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 really big one, I must say. But one that people don't put down to the authentic self, and that's a lack of intimacy in your relationships, or, just that feeling of not being fulfilled. And a lot of people are in relationships where they've kind of settled. They're not even really being their self with their partner. And that is showing because, they find it very hard to be vulnerable. There's not a lot of intimacy. So these are different things. So when we're looking at authentic self right at the very beginning, we might have been looking at it as a case of, are we being real? It goes a lot deeper than that. A lot deeper than that. So what can we do if we're having issues, or we've started to realize that maybe we're not necessarily being our authentic self? So, I've briefly just said, as therapists, the first tools in our toolbox are the core conditions of empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. So empathy is just about being able to see things from someone else's perspective. That's the easiest way I can describe it. So it's being able to stand alongside someone and see the world, or see a problem from the way that they see it. So from their perspective, their window to the world. Now, congruence, like I say, is about being genuine. So if you have someone around you that's not genuine, and I see it all the time, the best thing you can do is just be yourself. So by you being genuine and being connected to yourself and being your authentic self, it will help them to then be their authentic self. So, they're incongruent, you're being congruent. So unconditional positive regard. So I said it just not less than 5 minutes ago. These conditions of worth have come from having positive regard with conditions. So now to undo that, we have to show, these people, these loved ones that we have, unconditional positive regard. So let them do their worst behavior, and we're not going to love them any less. So it's a bit like children, when they're exhibiting some really bad behavior, and even though you're upset with them, you tell them that even though you're behaving like this, mummy's not upset. Mummy's upset with your behavior. Mummy still loves you, but I'm upset with the behavior. So it's that unconditional regard, because they've not had that before. Now, if you're the person that's struggling, you can notice that you're not being your authentic self. Build self-esteem. Build self-esteem. Self-esteem, is a basic thing in all mental health, but building your self-esteem will help. The way you view yourself is important. You will care less about how others view you if you work on the way you view yourself. it's not a coincidence that people with high self-esteem, most of them could give a toss what you think about them. And I think that's very positive to a certain degree. I'm not saying, go around and be totally oblivious to what people are saying, but on the whole, it's your life. So implement good boundaries. So that's another basic requirement for most mental health. Seek out new experiences, because you'll find a lot of people say, I don't really know who I am. Go and seek out those new experiences that, can reconnect you with your artistic self or your sporting self or whatever it is. Find your tribe. Find your tribe. Find your tribe. Because you've had possibly this invalidation for your life. You need people around you that validate you. If you're going to be your authentic self, you don't want people around you that are constantly criticizing you for no reason. You want to be around people that accept you exactly as you are. And I'm very fortunate in that regard. I'm a bit of an eccentric person. So my friends that, are very understanding and very accepting of me. And because of that, I feel okay to be my authentic self. Whereas I have certain people in my life that make me feel funny about the way I am. And I'm not really my authentic self. So, if you're someone that struggles and you've had those past where people have told you to be quiet and you think it's a good thing not to show emotions, I've said it before and I'll say it again, learn how to be vulnerable. You can learn. There are fears underneath, being vulnerable. And if you go back and explore your conditions of worth, and this is why I mentioned them. So going back to your childhood, look at the things that you do, the patterns of behavior that you have. Like I said, are you always compliant? So are you that people pleaser? Are you always quiet so you don't show emotions? Are you that high achiever that's just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and not acknowledging? These are all the things that conditions of worth do to people, and they stop you from being your authentic self. So I would say let the mask fall off. It's a mask, and sometimes we're not aware that we're wearing it. But I will say to a certain degree, because I'm probably thinking that some people are like, well, you can't be your authentic self all the time. No, you can't. We have a true self and a false self anyway. When we go to work, we don't necessarily do some of the things that we would do with our friends. So there is an element of true and false self, but where it becomes problematic is when you don't realize that you're presenting that false self more than the true self. So the true self gets hidden away within that. So with the authentic self, it's about being mindful and being aware. And being your authentic self is not, it's a bit like self-awareness. It's not really a destination where you can say, okay, I'm here, guys. I'm now my authentic self. It's a journey. There'll be some things that you need to adjust. There'll be things that you continuously need to work on. Because I would say that I'm largely my authentic self, but sometimes I have times where I care way too much about others' opinions. So therefore I know that there's still work to be done. This podcast nearly never happened because I cared so much about people's opinions. And everyone's got opinions, but you don't have to listen to them. And what you need to really work on is making sure that you value your own. Your opinion is just as important as anybody else's. So, today we've learned a little bit. I spoke briefly at the end about the core conditions. So, when you're talking to your friends, the core conditions are everyday skills that you can use. So be empathic. So we'll start again, empathy being the major one. And that just means simply trying to see the world from someone else's view. And that often happens in friendship. You don't agree with what the person's saying, so you shut down. See the world from someone else's view. So, are we being empathic and not judging? All right. So that's the first thing. Congruence. Are we being genuine and real and not hiding behind a mask? Because if we're doing that in our friendships, we're then encouraging our friends to do likewise. Are we showing unconditional positive regard? So that might involve forgiveness, guys, for some of you that struggle to forgive. You can't expect not to forgive people. You're going to need forgiveness at some point. So it's that unconditional positive regard. So people are not feeling like the minute they do something wrong, you're going to withdraw that love or affection, because that's not a particularly nice place to be in. So I don't know. I would like to know, what 2 things you guys are grateful for in the comments, because we're really going to step this up. When we get to G, we're going to do gratitude, because that's so important. Let me know some of your conditions of worth. You know, maybe before today, you never even looked at it like that, but there's always a reason why we are the way we are. So briefly, just going back to the beginning of the podcast, I introduced Bubbles, the Rasta monkey. Now, on first hand, it might just look like a soft toy that a grown adult like me should not have. But anyone that has children will be aware of the importance of transitional objects at times. So, you know, when your child's 6 months old, you might give them their first toy or their first blanket, and, you know, they keep it for as long as possible. And it represents you in some cases. So it helps them with like separation anxiety. But also when kids and even adults are stressed out and going through anxious times, if you select something that reminds you of something. Now, this Bubbles the Rasta monkey is not just any monkey. This monkey was given to me by my mum on one of her many trips to Jamaica, because she knows how much, firstly, I like soft toys, and secondly, how much I like monkeys. Please don't tell me it's a chimpanzee. It's my monkey, all right? So this reminds me of my mum. So even though it's a soft toy and I'm a big grown adult, you know, this has helped me stay still in this podcast. So this is also very useful for neurodivergent people. So if you see big grown people with something like this, mind your business, because you don't know the reason why. So this could help a child in a particularly stressful moment if they've internalized. You can also use things like a photo, a jumper that smells of your loved one. But for me, it's Bubbles. So Bubbles has kept me still, relatively calm. But, you know, if I was having a panic attack, this is something that on the first hand might just look like a monkey, but this represents my mum, who for me is very calming and, you know, has that effect on me. So I hope, you know, that's taught us something. So guys, we may never get to totally being authentic. There's things in life that stop us from, you know, being the way we want to be sometimes. But the aim is to get more towards that authentic self. We want to get more towards it, and, you know, start caring a little bit less about what others think. But it's not just as easy as that. If you don't have the self-esteem, or you don't have that awareness of how your past is affecting you, you may not know that you're not living an authentic life. And an inauthentic life is an unhappy life, in my opinion. So we need to start exploring our conditions of worth and getting in touch with our authentic selves. There's a tribe for everybody. Just be yourself. Everybody else is taken. So guys, thanks for listening today. Hit me up in the comments and let me know 2 things. If you can't think of 2 things, just 1 thing that you're grateful for. Please like, share, and subscribe if you can. Subscription will get us a bit further down the line. But I really want you guys to have a good day and start thinking about how you can start living a more authentic life. So have a good one, and I'll catch you next time with Boundaries.